In the previous episode, I bought this cast mower from a reclamation yard for £35. I was told that it all worked fine, but it soon came apparent that it didn't. The carburetor was dirty, so that was cleaned thoroughly, and after getting it started, I also discovered that the engine had a bent crankshaft. Although the mower could cut the grass quite well, it was very, very uncomfortable to operate. So I published a poll so my viewers could decide whether or not it was worth rebuilding the engine, and as you can see, there was a fairly overwhelming yes. So today, we're going to rebuild it. Welcome to my full engine rebuild of a Briggs and Stratton 450E. In addition to the bent crankshaft, the muffler is actually missing its guard, the rocker cover for the valves is leaking, and the recoil does not always engage. All these issues will be addressed in this video, and by the end it should be like new. So let's disassemble the engine, starting with the recoil cover. The nice thing about these little engines is there's not really much holding them together, they sort of just slot together. So the fuel tank unclips, the air filter cover unclips, and then the main air filter box can be removed using 4 screws. The carburetor is then just a push fit, and that will pull off the intake. It does have an O-ring and a white retaining ring. And as I did fully clean this carburetor in the previous episode, I can just simply refit it again when I reassemble the engine. The governor lever and the tab are connected using a spring. This regulates the speed of the engine. We're now on to disassembling the engine from the top, so we have the ignition coil, the flywheel cup, the flywheel itself, and the flywheel plate, which actually doubles up as the breather cover. Now I do usually use a flywheel puller, but for this particular one I tend to just use a pry bar and a copper hammer, because it does work very quickly and easily, but you do need to be careful. With the flywheel removed, it's always good to check the flywheel key to see if it's sheared. If it's sheared, then you've likely hit something quite hard, and it will need to be replaced. This is the plate I was telling you about. It is not just a flywheel plate, it's also the breather cover, and it is sealed with some silicone. And underneath you can see we do have the breather valve and the breather tube. On the back of the engine we have the engine brake, it's also the engine ground. This is how you stop the engine when you let go of the handle. The muffler can be easily restored using some heat-proof paint. Flipping the engine up on its back now so that we can remove the spark plug, the rocker cover and the cylinder head. It looks like the cover leak was just because of an old, perished, dirty gasket. And here we have the valve rockers. They've seen the light of day. Off with the head. And here we have the great reveal. It really isn't too bad in here. There's a bit of carbon and some scoring, likely from carbon which is broken off. But yes, it could be a lot worse. I'm just marking the valve push rods with 2 different colours to identify them as intake and exhaust. Next, the gasket. It's very rare that you'll be able to reuse a head gasket on one of these, and it just shows how easy it is for the carbon to break off, and this is quite coarse when it gets stuck between the piston and the bore. Time to go inside. Now this was a bit of a concern because the crankshaft is so bent I can't actually remove the sump. As the shaft is scrap anyway, I'll just cut it off. That certainly makes it easier. And now we can see the fairly grimy inside. First up we have the oil slinger, which actually doubles up as the governor. This is how the engine lubricates and regulates its speed. This is followed by the camshaft. This is what times the engine and opens and closes the valves. It seems to be in good condition. Then we have the valve tappets. That's what the camshaft lobes push on, and then on the other side of that we've got the push rods, which then connect to the rockers. Being very careful here, we've got a shim and a plastic timing gear on the crankshaft. Extra care always needs to be taken here because this is when you could really slice your knuckles open, so I tend to use a small ratchet rather than a spanner. But once removed, I'll be able to take the whole piston assembly out of the crankcase. Yeah, the piston really doesn't look too bad, it just needs a good clean, and I'll put some new rings in as well. Always good to put rings in if you are doing a full rebuild. You can see the scratches and scoring. This is very common for an aluminium bore engine. This does not have a cast iron sleeve. And it actually does look a lot worse than it is. You can't really feel them with your fingernail. So with the whole engine disassembled, it's now time to restore the head. It has 4 head bolts, not very many, I know, very few in fact. And this is the intake side. So I'm just going to remove this. There is a plastic manifold with an O-ring which will be replaced later. I think it's okay, but it just comes in the kit anyway. Then we have the rockers. Behind them we have the little cap that sits on top of the valves. That's what the rockers push on directly. And then the spring can be very easily removed on these small engines. And then the valve stem, the whole valve assembly, will just fall out. And there we have the intake and the exhaust valve. You can't really mix them up because they are 2 different sizes. And the cylinder head is ready to be cleaned. There is actually a valve seal on the intake side, and I've been extra careful not to damage that, but you can replace that if it is letting oil by and burning oil. Time for a good clean and then reassembly. All degreased, and now I can wire wheel it. Using the Dremel makes it very easy to get into all the very tight areas, especially around the valve seats. It's where carbon likes to gather and get stuck. Although this engine doesn't really seem to need it, I'm going to lap the valves. This is done using an abrasive compound, which will create a good seal between the valve face and the valve seat. My valve lapping plunger is actually a little bit big for this, so I'm going to use a cordless drill. Obviously extra care is taken when using this approach, but you can see that we do have a nice silver ring which will create a good seal. I'm now going to repeat the same process on the exhaust valve, which usually tends to be a bit worse. With both done, the valves can be reinstalled. The head can go to one side, and now it's time to work on the rest of it. So the crankcase is sandblasted. This is not something I recommend unless you are dedicated to cleaning every single little bit of sandblasting media out of all the components. But it works well. I do like doing it this way, but it does take me a long time to clean it up afterwards. I think the results speak for themselves. So now the crankcase, sump and all the other internal components can be thoroughly cleaned, and then we'll be on to reassembly. That's all the parts thoroughly cleaned except for the piston. I need to first of all remove the old rings, and then once they're out of the way I can wire wheel the piston head and clean the whole thing with solvent. Now despite the fact that I'm going to be changing the rings, I'm still going to put them back into the bore and I'm going to measure the ring gap just to see if they are within spec or not. Just remove the expander ring. And there we go. It can now be cleaned properly. So first up is the old top compression ring. And that one is 30 thou. So it's not massively out of spec, but we can definitely make that better. And then the second compression ring, the middle ring, that one is actually half that, 15 thou. So that's not too bad at all. But we are going to change the full set anyway, part number 591976 from Briggs and Stratton. And you can see in here we have the instructions, we have all the rings that you need, and the expander oil ring. And yeah, the instructions are helpful, although in this case it looks like they do not correlate to the rings themselves. There should be one ring with 2 painted marks and another ring with just a single painted mark. Seem to only have the single mark, so that makes it a little interesting. But the rings are going on, and these ones are slightly better at just over 10 thou for the compression rings. It is advised to use a piston ring expander to do the middle ring, although I always find it much easier just to use my hands to fit the top compression ring. But what's this? A new crankshaft has arrived. And there it is in all its glory. These things are not cheap. So before I fit it, I'm just going to give it a quick rinse. And with a new gasket set and the new crankshaft, we can get cracking with the rebuild. A little note there to remind us to use the correct part that is removed from our engine. I think it's actually referring to the cylinder head gasket, because we do have 2 variances. First part we need is the oil seal. I've always gotten well with this Permatex Ultra Slick reassembly oil. Not sponsored in any way, I just find it good. And the crankshaft is then covered with lashings of lube. The crankshaft is followed by the piston. The piston rings do need to be compressed using the piston ring compressor, and I do like to also put a bit of lube in the bore. It just allows the piston to slide in with ease. And the piston is in. The connecting rod can be attached to the crankshaft journal and then torqued to the correct setting. Next are the tappets. Then the camshaft was taking note of the timing marks. If these 2 marks are not aligned, then the engine will likely not run, and if it does, it will probably kick back. Another seal is fitted, this time the PTO seal into the sump. And I always like to use some high-tack gasket sealant on the main gaskets, just to guarantee that we do not have a leak. This is Permatex gasket sealant. With a final application of engine lube, the sump can be fitted, but being extra careful not to roll the seal. In go the bolts, and once again they need to be torqued to the correct setting. Quick check of the crankshaft end plate, and we can now move on to fitting the cylinder head. Now, because the push rods have been removed, they now need to be refitted under the rocker arms, and I find it easiest just to remove the rockers completely, then we can just refit them with a bit of reassembly lube, and then we can put the rockers back on again and set the clearance. The valve backlash clearance is 4 thou to 8 thou, so I just do 5 thou, somewhere roughly in the middle. That's the valve set. With the breather hose fitted, I'm just using some high temperature sealant on the breather cover, and then we can fit the main plate. Quick dash of reassembly lube on the rockers, and we're ready to fit the rocker cover. Now you probably sat there thinking, okay, it looks good on the inside, but the outside looks terrible. Well, of course it does. Let's give it a paint. I'm using some very high temperature paint here, actually way higher than it needs to be. It's barbecue paint, 750 degrees Celsius it can withstand. So I think it's probably going to be good enough for this. After leaving it to dry for over 24 hours, I can now continue the reassembly. So we've got the brake arm on the back. This is followed by the flywheel, which I have sandblasted. This is followed by the flywheel key, the cup, and of course the nut. We then have the ignition coil, and the business card is handy to set the gap. Needs to be a specific air gap of 10 thou. We're getting there, not much left to do. So back to the intake O-ring, just going to change that. Don't think it needs to be, but I might as well. And then that manifold can be refitted to the bracket and then to the engine. And we also do have the red O-ring on the carburettor, which I might as well change once again because I have it in the kit. The black O-ring and the white plastic retainer go into the other side of the carburettor, and we're almost ready to fit it, but we just need to fit the spring first of all for the governor. And with that done, the carburettor can slide into place. Now remember I said we were missing the guard. I actually managed to find a used muffler with the guard already fitted, so I just sprayed it up with some heatproof paint and it can be directly fitted. Time for the air filter box and primer assembly. Now the air filter box would not be complete without an air filter, and of course I do have the original one, which is genuine, and I also bought an aftermarket one and an OEM one, part number 799579. And you can really tell the difference between OEM and aftermarket. It's not only thicker, but also the finish is much better as well on the genuine one. But at a price difference of over £4, it's up to you which one you want to go for. Quick drizzle of oil and it's ready to be fitted. The reason for the oil is just to trap more dirt. Massaging an air filter. I know, not something you do every day, but they seem to like it. Right, that's enough of that. On it goes, and yes, I know the primer bulb doesn't look very clean. I have tried to clean it. The thing is, it works perfectly, so if it's not broken, don't fix it. Kind of hard for me with my restorations because somebody will always complain. But to be honest, I've already gone too far with this engine anyway. It was supposed to just be a quick will it run, and I've gone and restored the thing. Fuel tank and fuel line on and attached. And then it's time to repair, or replace in this case, the recoil. So I'm removing the old one. I can then thoroughly clean the main cover, and then I can just snap a new one into place. And finally, a new spark plug. And there we have it. The engine is finished. So let's get it fitted back onto the mower which it came from. Obviously that deck is going to be just a test deck, or it's going to be scrapped or something. But yeah, let's just see the engine run. My intention is actually to fit this engine to a different mower, probably a Hater or something like that, because they're actually really decent mowers. And yes, this engine is clearly going to be a great contender for one which has got a blown up engine, but a decent deck. So with the oil and petrol in, let's go take it for a spin. I've just bent the tab to make it run a bit faster, that was a bit too slow. And there we have it. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. I really do hope you've enjoyed this video. I'm pleased to actually see the end of this engine because I've got much more exciting stuff to do now. So stay tuned. Again, thank you so much to everybody who has become a channel member. Always very much appreciated. But otherwise, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.